possible, responsible leaders have an obligation to pursue it. Hope is not a strategy. Good intentions do not replace responsible planning. This alliance must remain capable. It must remain united. And above all, it must remain credible. Because credibility, once lost, is infinitely more difficult to reveal than to make. Ladies and gentlemen, Dais, Excellencies, and Ambassadors. Perhaps NATO's greatest success is not that we survived the Cold War, it was easy. It is that we never became what we opposed. Throughout, for decades of rivalry, our democracies remained democracies. Governments changed through elections. Policies changed through debate. Leaders accepted criticism, like someone did not. Journalists asked uncomfortable questions. Citizens protested. They had a right. Opposition parties won elections. Sometimes we frustrated one another. Sometimes we even frustrated ourselves. But we never abandoned the very principle we claim to defend. The consistency gave NATO something no military arsenal and inventory could ever provide: moral credibility. This is an old saying among sailors. The true test of a ship is not whether it survives cold weather. It is whether it remains steady after the storm has passed. The storm of the Cold War is beginning to fade. Now we discover what kind of alliance we truly are. Will we become complicit or will we become violent? Will we define ourselves by the enemies we once faced or by the peace we now have the opportunity to build? Those questions cannot be answered as peace. They will be answered by the decision made in this room. Distinguished ambassadors, future generations may never remember every resolution adopted during this time and this meeting or any document we write. They may never remember every amendment, every negotiation, any vote. They will remember whether the leaders of 1990 understood the extraordinary responsibilities history placed upon their shoulders. One day, perhaps decades from now, a student will open a history book and read about this moment. I hope that students will not read that we merely observed history. I hope they will read that we shaped it with wisdom, with patience and courage. And with the conviction, this peace never simply inherited, it's built. One decision at a time. Ladies and gentlemen, Dais, Excellencies, and representatives, the chapter that has just closed was written by coordination. The chapter we begin today must be written by cooperation. Let us ensure that when the future generations spoke of London in 1990, they do not remember it simply as another summit. Let them remember it as the moment when an alliance created to defend freedom, prove that it is also possessed with similar to security keys. Distinguished ambassadors, before we conclude, permit me one final reflection. Diplomats spend much of their life discussing treaties, budget, military capabilities, and political strategy. All of those matters are important. Indeed, they're essential. But every so often, history asks a simpler question. Not what did you negotiate, not what did you spend, not even what did you achieve. History asks, what kind of Europe did you choose to build? This is the question before us today. When NATO was founded in 1994, its creators faced a continent scaled by catastrophe. Their challenge was obvious. Prevent another war. It was really hard. Our challenge is less obvious, but it may be equally important. Prevent the return of the constitutions they make more possible. Fear, humiliation, economic collapse, and political extremism. The belief that violence is more useful than compromise. Those conditions do not disappear automatically when a wall falls over government change. They disappear only when responsible leaders work patiently to replace them with trust, prosperity, and cooperation. I often think of a church in Central Europe that was rebuilt after the war. The architect made an unusual decision. Instead of hiding the maidstone, he left several of them visible hole in the walls. When asked why, he answered, "If we erase every scar, the next generation may forget how this will be destroyed." Europe too carries visible scars. The ruins of passport, the memories of occupation, centuries that stretch across our continent. Those scars are painful, but they're also teachers. They remind us what happens when nationalism overwhelms reason, when fear overwhelms trust, and when leaders prefer applause to responsibility. That is why the development in Yugoslavia concerns us so deeply, not because we wish to interfere, not because we seek it, but because we recognize warnings signs that Europe has seen before, economic frustration and political paralysis. Leaders discovering that angry crowds are easier to satisfy than difficult compromise. History rarely repeats itself exactly. It changes every time, but it often rhymes loudly enough to bias people to hear it. Our duty is to listen before the rhyme becomes a tragedy. Some may wonder whether NATO is prepared for this new era. I believe we are. Not because we possess the largest armies, not because we command advanced technology, but because we have learned something extremely valuable during 4 decades of confrontation. Security is ultimately political. Armies can defend borders. Only political wisdom can create lasting peace. That wisdom begins with recognition that our former adversaries are not destined to remain adversaries forever. Yesterday, through the London Declaration, we acknowledged that possibility. Today, we must prove that our words were sincere. There is another lesson I have learned during my years in public life. Strong leaders are not those who never change their minds. Strong leaders are those who change their minds when reality changes, while it remains faithful to their principles. NATO has done exactly that. It defended freedom during the Cold War. Now we must help secure peace after it. The mission has evolved, the value and not. That continuity gives this alliance extraordinary strength. Another anecdote from a young soldier. That they came from a country. They had once fought bitterly against another member of this alliance. Today, he trains alongside soldiers from that very nation. I asked him what surprised him most. He threw for a moment and replied, "Sir, my grandfather will never have believed this was possible." That sentence stayed with me, because it captures the miracles of post-war Europe. Former enemies becoming allies, former battlefields becoming trading partners, former walls becoming tourist attractions. Such transformations are not inevitable. They are the result of deliberate political choices. And those choices were made again and again by leaders willing to think beyond the next election and the next headline. How many minutes have passed?
A total of almost 50 minutes, but I had to restart the recording, Mr. Secretary General.
It is not fun.
Yeah.
Dear ambassadors, the world is watching Europe. Not because Europe is perfect, but because Europe is attempting something rare in history. A continent that spent centuries fighting itself is trying to organize its peace. That fought deserves neither complacencies or silence. It deserves commitment. The United States and Canada have stood beside Europe for more than 4 decades because they understood a profound truth. A secure Europe contributes to a secure Atlantic community. That true remains valid. Our partnership is not a temporary arrangement. It's one of the great strategies achievement of the 20th century. As we began our deliberation, I asked each delegation to remember 3 simple principles. First, freedom is strongest when it's shared. Second, peace is strongest when it will defend it collectively. Third, stability is strongest when it's built through cooperation rather than coercion. This principle guided NATO through the darkest years of Cold War. They can guide us through the uncertainties ahead. One day, historians will write about 90. They will describe the fall of the Berlin Wall, then the reunification of Germany, the collapse of communist regimes across history, and perhaps they will also, or during that, Perhaps they will also write about gathering in London or in Rome or further else anywhere, where leaders recognized that the end of one confrontation did not eliminate their responsibility for the future. I hope they will say that we understood the moment, that we resisted tribalism, that we chose partnership over revenge, vigilance over complacency, and responsibility over applause. Most of all, I hope they will say that we remembered why this alliance was created in the first place. Not to dominate Europe, not to divide Europe, but to ensure that Europeans could decide their own future in freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, the Iron Curtain is lifted, and New Europe is struggling to be born. The task before us is not merely to witness that birth. It is to help ensure that the child grows up in a space. Let us begin that work together. Thank you. Thank you, Asad.